So, in this lecture, we will discuss about those empires developed during 6th century BC, in particular the Magadha Empire, with the founding of the Haryanka Dynasty and subsequently by the Nandas and finally the Mauryan Empire, and how in turn it led to the invasion of Greeks, the establishment and invasion of the Sathavhanas and the Kushanas. Then we will discuss about the South Indian empires developed during 300 BC or before Christ, in particularly by the Pandyas Cholas, Cheras, Sathavhanas and Bhaktakas, and also by the Rashtrakutats, the Chalukyas, the Pallavas, and the rule of Kharavela in ancient Kalinga. So, in context of Magadha, a struggle for power began with the kings Bimbisara and Ajatasattu of the kingdom of Magadha. In the 4th century BC, the dynasty of Nandas came to power. They had their capital at Pataliputra, the modern Patna. In the last quarter of the 4th century BC, the Mauryan dynasty replaced the Nandas. This came about partly as a result of Alexander's invasion and the decline of Iranian strength in India. Chandragupta Maurya took advantage of the unsettled conditions and with the help of his advisor Kautilya or Chanakya built the first great empire in India under Chandragupta Maurya and his two great successors, Bindusara and Ashoka. Almost the whole of India, with the exception of the farthest south, was unified into one empire. The former Greek territories of Arya, Arcosia, in the northwest of India became part of the Mauryan Empire. When an invasion led by Seleucus fell, the Mauryan Empire at its greatest extent during the rule of Ashoka the Great. Many important developments took place in the social, economic and cultural life of the Indian people in this period, in particularly 322 to 184 BC. Particularly important was the spread of Buddhism, which had been introduced earlier. The decline of the Mauryan Empire after the rule of Ashoka was followed by a long period of new invasions and the formation of small states. Of the foreign invasions, the first was that of the Greeks, who were the rulers of Bactria. The Greeks were able to conquer Punjab and parts of Sindh. The Greeks' contact had a lasting influence on the culture of India. One of its consequence was the development of the Gandhara style of act. The greatest Greek ruler in India was Menendra or Milinda in the 2nd century BC, who became a Buddhist. The famous Buddhist work Milinda Panda consists of a dialogue between Menendra and Buddhist philosopher. The Greek invasion was followed by that of the Sakas. The Sakas displaced the Greeks in Bactria and spread their power to western India. They also occupied Malwa. One of the Saka king was Rudradamana, who, as the name suggests, was a devotee of Shiva. He was responsible for important irrigation wars in Saurashtra. The Sakas, like other invaders, became a part of Indian life and played an important part in the development of Indian culture. Another group of invaders from Central Asia was that of the Kushanas early in the 1st century AD. The greatest of the Kushana rulers was Kanishka, who, according to some historians, started the Sauk era in AD 78. Kanishka ruled his vast empire in India and Central Asia from Purushapur, modern Peshawar. For 40 years, Kanishka's empire brought to India the cultural traditions of Iran, Greece and Rome. It also provided the stimulus to trade between India and other parts of the world. Kanishka patronized the Mahayana form of Buddhism. It almost spread to Central Asia during this period, and from there to China, Korea and Japan. The Kushan Empire declined in 3rd century. In the 3rd century BC, there were 3 kingdoms in southern India, such as the Pandyas ruled over the southernmost and southeastern parts of India from their capital at Madurai. The Cholas ruled over the Coromandel coast. The Cholas seem to have conquered Sri Lanka and ruled over it for some time. The Cheras ruled over much of the present Kerala. The most important kingdom in the Deccan and central India after the Mauryan was that of the Sathavhanas. The Satavahana kingdom reached its zenith under Gautami Putra Satakarni from the period AD 106 to AD 130 and declined in the 3rd century AD. It fell when the Bhaktakas emerged. However, the cultural tradition of the Satavahanas lived on through the Rashtrakutats, the Chalukyas and the Pallavas. The last rose to power in the 3rd century with their capital at Kanchi in Odisha. A strong kingdom had arisen in the 1st century BC under the rule of Kharavada. In these kingdoms, there was a mixing of the Aryan and the Dravidian traditions and further development of the cultural unity of India. At the time these kingdoms flourished, there was nothing exclusively Aryan or Dravidian in their moods or cultural traits. Kanchi, for example, was an important seat of Sanskrit learning and of Buddhism and Jainism. The building and painting of cave temples at Ajanta and Ellora began with the Satavahanas. These kingdoms also developed widespread trading contacts with the Roman Empire. South East Asia, West Asia and China and foreign trade came to play an important part in the economic life of the people. The excavations at Arikamandu The Roman trading port near Madras have thrown much light on the Indo-Roman trade relations in ancient times. Trade with Southeast Asian countries also led to many Indian settlements there, some of which played an important role in political and cultural development of those countries. So now we will discuss about the rising of the Gupta dynasty during the 4th century AD. When these developments were taking place in North India was also undergoing important changes. Early in the 4th century AD, Chandragupta I established the Gupta dynasty in Magadha. His son Samudragupta conquered almost the whole of northern India. He performed the Ashwamedha sacrifice to assert his supremacy and carried his military expedition into the south. His successor Chandragupta II made more conquest, after which the Gupta Empire declined. Although the Gupta Empire was never as extensive as the Mauryan Empire, ancient Indian culture reached its peak under the Guptas. The Gupta Empire soon declined as a result of the Hun invasion in the 5th century AD. By the 6th century AD, it had fallen apart completely. After the decline of the Gupta Empire, India was again divided into a number of states, thus each one struggling for supremacy. For a time, a large part of North India was united by Harshavardhan, ruling from Thaneshwar near Delhi. But he could not match the power of the Chalukyas further south. After the death of Harshavardhan, many small Rajput states rose in the north. Although the period after the Guptas was one of many relatively weak states, cultural progress continued. So in this lecture, we discuss almost the development made up to the Gupta dynasty during the 4th century AD, and after the fall of the Gupta dynasty, we discuss about the rise of Harshavardhana, and after the fall of the Harshavardhana dynasty, we have discussed about the rising of Rajput states and the continuing cultural development and progress made in spite of the change in political scenario, which was continuing since the 6th century BC, since the very beginning and development establishment of Magadha dynasty, and its continuity with other different kingdoms, monarchies, and even republics, small republics that we have discussed, and those large kingdoms like Kasi, Kushala, Anga, Magadha, Chedi, Bhashya, Avanti, and small republican states or kingdoms such as Kuru, Panchala, Matsya, Shaurasena, Ashoka, Gandhara, and Kamboja. So we have discussed about those small republican states such as the Priji, which was consisting Videho, Lichavi, Jantrika. Then about the Shakyas, Malas, the Kolyas, Bhagas, and the Mauryas. Then we discuss about the first most important Indian empire developed in Magadha under the Haryanka dynasty. Then the dynasty established by the Nandas and finally the Mauryan Empire, and how after the end of the Mauryan Empire came the Greeks, the Shakas, the Kushanas. Then we discuss about the Pandyas, the Cholas, Cheras, those who rose to power in South India during 300 BC or before Christ, and how in continuity it was running by the Sathavhanas, the Bhaktakas, the Rashtrakutats, Chalukyas, Pallavas, and finally the rule of the Kautilya in Kalinga in the modern day Odisha during the 300 BC, and in particularly in the context of Kautilya. He was ruling over the ancient Kalinga or the modern day Odisha during 1st century BC or before Christ. And then we have discussed about the rise of the Gupta Dynasty in the 4th century AD and the very spread of Indian culture and architecture, etc. during the period of Gupta Dynasty. That's why it was considered in the ancient Indian history as a golden period. Then we discuss about the rise of Harshavardhan, and after the decline of the Vardhana dynasty in Delhi, how the small Rajput states they developed and acquired the power for even a short period. And finally, that we discuss the most important thing, that besides the very political changes, the Indian culture and the continuity of Indian culture, that was found the most important development during the ancient period in India. So in our next upcoming lecture we will discuss about the administration and government in ancient India, in particularly during the Vedic period. Then the empires period starting from Magadhan Empire, then the socio-economic conditions of those period, then the religion and philosophy that we found during ancient Indian period, the language and literature, then science and medicine, art and architecture that developed during the ancient period in India, from the Vedic to pre-Vedic and Vedic times up to the Guptas. That we will discuss in our upcoming lecture.